Oobie-doo, it's everyone's favorite boomer and vintage lens enthusiast. And today we're going to look at the Nikon Zoom Nikkor 28 to 50 millimeter 1 to 3.5. Here's a pro tip. Suppose you're going out in a photo shoot, right? And you stick your lens cap in your pocket. And then guess what? You put it back on your lens, your lens is going to get full of dust. I learned that the hard way. How about that? So I try and watch out for that. When I blow off the lens with some sort of compressed gas, I also blow off the lens cap. What do I like about it? Well, this is on the Nikon Z50, which is an outstanding mirrorless camera. If you're going to go mirrorless, you can't go wrong with one of the Z series cameras. This is a crop sensor, 20 megapixel, and it's got a whole bunch of cool stuff in the menu. We'll look at that real quickly. Let's turn this on. So you got all this good stuff to play with. Multiple exposure, how about that? High dynamic range, interval timer shooting, time-lapse movie, silent photography, right? Cool stuff, right? ISO sensitivity settings. Well, some of it is doubled up. This stuff works really good. The long exposure noise reduction and high ISO noise reduction, vignette control, diffraction compensation, distortion control, flicker reduction for under fluorescent light. Let's see, let's go back to menu. Okay. That's for movie, got a whole bunch of movie stuff. All sorts of cool stuff. In fact, there's too much stuff. But a word about menus. All menus are arbitrary. People say, this menu is illogical and blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? All menus are arbitrary. And, you know, this is feature rich. And what I do is I find out the features I want. And then I forget about the rest. It also has this thing, the eye, which is just a whole bunch of stuff you use a lot. Like I use the release mode a lot. And usually I use 5 seconds. Okay. And of course, let's just turn it off because this confused me later. There's a Wi-Fi connection. I have that turned off. There's a flash mode. Image quality is fine. You could fine-tune that with all this other stuff. And set picture control, white balance, image size, all sorts of cool stuff. It's a great camera. It has a whole bunch of stuff. It has a whole bunch of stuff. I have the grid on because it helps me keep the camera, you know, straight lines and all that good stuff. So, but this isn't really about this camera, but it's a really good camera. It's a mirrorless camera, so it has the electronic viewfinder. It has this screen here. Did I just take a picture? I just took a picture. No, it's off. Why did it take so long to shut off? I don't know. Of course, if you use old f-mount lenses, you need the F-to-Z adapter, which means the F to Z adapter. And I bought this with a Z6 bundle, but now you gotta buy them separate. So at any rate, since I had this and the Z6, I have so many lenses, I went out and I bought this too. And believe me, this is the only camera you need. Nikon nailed it with the mirrorless cameras, without a doubt. So this is let's look at this lens. What's so great about it? Well, it's fully manual aperture, right? Which is neither here nor there. If you notice, I have it in M mode. It has a push-pull zoom, one touch push-pull. So you push and pull for zoom, and then you can focus. It has a macro. This is the 50 millimeter setting. Then you can go into the macro mode. There's a little indent there, and then you could go into macro mode, right? Now, you can't zoom it when you're in the macro mode, but if you go past the macro mode, then you could go to the wide, and then, well, no macro for you. How about that? But it still focuses down to, does it focus down to? 2 feet or 0.6 meters, but in the macro mode, it gets you down to 0.32 meters. How about that? That's pretty cool. Look at it. It has a depth of field scale. So if you set this thing, it's color coded, f11, that's like f11. So you know hyperfocally you would be in that if you want to shoot quick. Because that's the thing. Although this is a mirrorless camera and you could use the zoom feature, this is when you're in, you tap this and it zooms up on the image, then you can focus precisely. And then, you back off and you can take your picture. Make sure you don't move your lens barrel while you're doing that. And it's better than any DSLR that has the focus assist, like the red dot or square in the middle that blinks when you hit the focus. So it's well made. It's the old school, all metal. I think it has a rubber focusing collar, but it's all metal, high quality construction. You can't beat it. So what I did was I went to a town where they have a Christmas display, and they had a whole bunch of lights. And I went there early in the morning, like before sunrise, and I set it at ISO 1600, and I shot wide open at f3.5, and I shut the shutter speed to 125, and then I just blasted away. And as usual, I'm going to display a 16:9 full frame crop, resized in 1920 by 1080, and then I made a 1920 by 1080 crop mask, and then I just went to the corner edge somewhere, and then that same photo I just cropped it full frame crop so you could see what's happening, and I marked them this time with A and B. So A would be the full frame resize, and then B would be the 1920 by 1080 crop. Now, since this is 20 megapixels, 1920 by 1080, that's a pretty heavy-duty magnifying crop, so you really get to see what this lens does. Now, let's talk about chroma. You're going to see a lot of chroma in the pictures, especially on edges. And then these are bright lights. The bright lights always have chroma. As an astrophotographer, you don't like chroma. I notice when I take pictures of stars, the dim stars always come out round and sharp, but the bright ones always seem to have chroma. Well, chroma is also part of the reflections of the different glass elements. Even with multi-coating, it's still the brighter stars. You could see the chroma, it accentuates them. Now you could see in the bright Christmas lights on the edge of the field crops that I did, there's a lot of chroma. But if you look at the branches and the other details next to the lights, it's a pretty decent image. So maybe it gives a character, it makes it look cool or something, I don't know. But I found this, I really like this lens, especially later on when it got brighter and I stopped on that 5.6, it was near perfect. And then I went to the park and it was snowy and cloudy bright afternoon. I stopped on f8, 11, and 16, and I dropped the ISO to like 400, and I used a faster shutter speed, and you can see that it's a fine performer, excellent performer. And it's a cheap lens. It's $120 or something like that. That could change with inflation and all that. This is an excellent example. I mean, it does have some slight wear on it, but otherwise the optics, and it's perfectly mechanically operating. So I feel like I got a deal on it. Of course, where did I get it from? KEH down in Georgia. And I have nothing to do with them. I'm just throwing them a bone because you say, oh, well, Boomer, where do you get all your stuff? Well, I get a lot of it from KEH. And then, sometimes they don't have them in stock and you kind of keep going back. And then sometimes as they come in and they have an excellent one, a very good one, a good one, and then they have an ugly one. Well, I always get the excellent one. So what, the excellent one costs another $30 or $40, well, the hell with it. So this is a really, really nice lens. Unfortunately, it goes from 50 to 28. So that's 50, that's 28. Now, this is made for the film era. So 50 to 28 was considered a normal to like, 28 used to be called super wide back in the day. But on a crop sensor, 28 Well, what's f/28 14? 28 and 14. That's 42 millimeters. So it goes from a short normal to like what you call a 75 millimeter short telephoto, and it's still excellent for walking around. And with this macro mode here, well, it gives you a little bit extra plus to do something out of the ordinary with, and I highly recommend it. And I also highly recommend the Z50. I used to be a Canon guy. I'm still a Canon guy. Got a lot of Canon glass. I got some Canon DSLRs, the CT series mostly. But this blows everything away. Look, I'm shooting this on a Sony A50 100, and I got into it because it was cheap. But this blows Sony away too. I mean, I like the Sony, but this is one of my go-to cameras now, without a doubt, without a doubt. And then you check out the samples I got. I shot this lens under some of the most demanding conditions. It was 25 degrees out. It was pre-dusk, so I was shooting at ISO 1600, 1/25th of a second, and I was wide open at 3.5, and various apertures, various focal lengths between 28 millimeters and 50 millimeters. So the A, if you see an A in the picture, that means that's the full frame, just shrunk down to fit this movie format. And then the B is a crop of that full frame, but not shrunk down. So I for this format, 1920 by 1080, I just made a crop mask and I cropped it right out. So what are the takeaways that I notice here? This lens is capable of doing fantastically sharp, even under low lighting conditions and wide open. You're going to see flare, and the flare is going to be some from coma, and some of it's going to be from being out of focus. F3.5, no depth of field at all. Plus, you're going to see some 1600 noise. The camera really did an excellent job, and shooting at 1/25th of a second was just a little bit too dark, and I had to boost the shadows a little bit to bring out this detail, which I thought was amazing too, that it still had some headroom left over. And I didn't want to go any slower than 1/25th of a second, because then I would have got motion blur, and that would have compounded whatever results I got. So 1/25th of a second, yeah, I could do that easy without a tripod. I mean, 25 degrees at, 6:45 in the morning, you don't want to lug a tripod around with you, that's for sure. Actually, I think the lens did an admirable job. I'm going to do another photo shoot with this lens in more, normal daylight conditions. And we'll see how that is, minus the any sort of point lights. But I really like this lens. It's got excellent build quality. I think the IQ is really good. When you nail the focus, it is outstanding. And you got to remember, I focused on these statues, but of course in the background it's going to look blurry. And even here too, here's the Christmas tree. I focus on the Christmas tree, but then these things off to the side aren't in perfect focus, and they're going to accentuate any problems the lens has. But I threw them in there because under real life shooting conditions, this is what you're going to get. Now, I could have brought a tripod with me. I could have set it up. I could have shot at a slower ISO and a slower shutter speed, but I don't know. I just didn't want to. Now, when it got lighter out, and you're going to see this later, and I stopped the lens down a little bit, oh man, it's a fantastic performer. Now, this is the thing. This lens was f3.5 throughout its whole zoom range, from 28 to 50 millimeters. But when you look at more modern lenses, maybe they start at 3.5 at the wide end, and then when you get to the maximum zoom, they go down to 4.5 or 5.6, which means that I wouldn't be able to take some of these pictures at the parameters I set. You would have almost had to use a tripod then. And you could see this. Many modern lenses with this zoom ratio, the 50 millimeter end, they're 5.6, and that's like 2 stops down. And I would have had to maybe boost the ISO to 3200, maybe went to 160th, 130th, and then I would have got motion blur. I would have got more high ISO noise, even though this thing has built-in noise reduction for high ISO. But it doesn't do a perfect job getting rid of it. Nothing really does. So that's a plus. When you have a lens that has a constant aperture, and then when you go out through your zoom range, you don't have to worry about that. Losing a light gathering ability at one end of the zoom instead of another. I don't know why even manufacturers went to that. Maybe it's easier to design lenses. I can't say. But just think, this thing is at 3.5, and under certain lighting conditions, like maybe here, I started stopping it down to 5.6. So when you stop down a lens 1 or 2 f-stops, that's when you're going to get your best image quality. So if I was shooting wide open at 5.6, well, you're wide open at 5.6. Here I'm stopped down, so I'm going to get the benefit of stopping a lens down and controlling flare and aberrations and getting more depth of field. So you got to look at it like that too. I guess they still make modern lenses that keep a constant aperture, but they tend to cost more, a lot more. Now, it was dark. Like in this picture, to my eye, it seemed dark, but the camera was actually boosting the brightness a little bit. And here it was definitely daylight, and it was definitely stopped down. So I got the benefits of, a stop-down lens and all that implies. Now the Z50 is a full-time mirrorless camera, so I don't have to go into live mode like in a DSLR. And of course, it has you could do a focus. It has if you use a dedicated lens, it has autofocus. But since this is a manual focus lens, I could have went to the center dot focus confirmation, but I didn't. I just pushed the magnifying button, and then I actually focused on the magnified view, and then recomposed after I went to reduce the magnification and took my picture. So of course these are much more in focus looking, and that is a problem with DSLRs and using manual lenses on them, is how do you make sure that the focus confirmation is really in focus. In the olden days, when you had an old-fashioned 35 millimeter full frame SLR, they had focusing assists. They had like a split image rangefinder, or it had a thing called microdiaprism that as you turned the lens, it was either blurry or the image would split and it lined up, and then you got to see the benefit of this. But then was that focusing screen at exactly the same distance as the film was, right? Because it's a SLR. So they had to have that focusing screen had to be with 1/1000th of an inch of the same distance from the lens to the film. And then film buckles. It was never really flat. I mean, they had these polished rails and all that stuff in the old-fashioned film cameras, but that was all BS. I mean, the film always buckled a little bit, and then you were pretty much forced to, stop down and rely on the depth of field and hyperfocal distancing. But, with these modern cameras, you focus, you're in focus, boom, that's it. Now, in these snow pictures, it was cloudy, bright out, and I was able to stop down to f8, 11, or even 16. I was using ISO 400 and a much faster shutter speed. And of course, there's still, you can see where it's precisely in focus, it's really sharp. And when it's not quite in focus, it's just a little bit fuzzy. See, like here's a little bit fuzzy. I must have focused on those stupid reeds in the foreground. Now, what's interesting is you the hyperfocal distance. That's where if you stop down to f16 and if you have a depth of field scale, you put infinity at the 116 mark, then you see you can get all the way down to like 6 feet, quote unquote, in focus. But does it really work? Somewhat.